My name is Bella Harper. I used to think that being married for 10 years meant being safe, secure, and trusting, but one night changed everything I thought. It was our anniversary, exactly 10 years since Ethan, and I stood under a canopy of garden lights and swore to be together forever. He took me to the Crescent, the city's highest and most expensive restaurant, to celebrate. It's the kind of place where you don't simply eat, you achieve accomplishment. The chandelier twinkled like stars, and the skyline behind our table seemed like a painted backdrop. I chose a basic but exquisite navy silk dress that hugged me just enough to show I still cared. Ethan looked sharp as always in his black suit, dark tie, and a trace of the cedarwood scent that used to make me feel better. When I sat down across from him, he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He raised a glass of Cabernet and said, "Happy anniversary, Mads." I clinked my glass with his and said, "To us," but even then, something didn't feel right. It was a small change in his energy. His voice was smooth, like he had practiced it, yet there was a tension below, like a violin string that was too tight. He glanced at his phone more than at me. His fingers drummed the table while I tried to ask about his day. Maybe he was just tired, maybe I was overthinking it, but deep down I knew the truth. Something had been off for months. Late-night calls he brushed off as client emergencies, weekend meetings that popped up last minute, a growing coldness in his touch, like the man who once stayed up all night helping me design my first pitch deck had disappeared. That night, under the glow of that perfect skyline, I felt lonelier than I'd ever felt in our 10 years together. I didn't know yet what he had planned. I didn't know this night would end in a hospital or that a glass of wine would change our lives forever, but I knew something wasn't right, and I was right. Looking back, the signs were there. They weren't loud or obvious. They were quiet, creeping things, easy to dismiss, easier to excuse, but they were real. Ethan and I had always been a power couple in the eyes of others. He ran an investment firm with a shiny office and designer suits. I built my consulting agency from scratch. People admired us, thought we had it all figured out, and for a while, we did. But over the past year, things had shifted. Ethan became distracted, less present. It started small, missed calls, vague answers about where he was, why he was late. I told myself he was just under pressure, big clients, tight deadlines. I knew that world too well. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living with a stranger. He'd sit at the dinner table and barely touch his food, scrolling through his phone like it held a secret he couldn't share. When I'd ask about his day, his answers were clipped, guarded. "Same old," he'd say with a shrug, "you know how it is." But I didn't, not really. The intimacy we once had, late-night conversations, spontaneous weekend getaways, even small rituals like cooking together on Sundays, had disappeared. In their place was silence or, worse, politeness. Once, I asked him if something was wrong. He looked up from his laptop, gave me a hollow smile, and said, "No, babe, just tired." But I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't tired, he was elsewhere, emotionally gone. There was a moment, a few weeks before our anniversary, when I found a second phone in his gym bag. It wasn't locked, but when I opened it, it was wiped clean, no contacts, no messages, nothing but a home screen. I wanted to believe it was nothing. Maybe he was trying to separate work and personal life. Maybe it wasn't even his. But my gut said otherwise. That night, I lay awake next to him, staring at the ceiling, wondering how we got here, two people under the same roof, living two different stories. And still, I didn't leave. I didn't ask the hard questions. I wanted to believe in us, believe that this was just a phase, a rough patch. But sometimes what we call a rough patch is really just the beginning of an ending. I excused myself halfway through the meal, claiming I needed to freshen up. In truth, I just needed space. The tension at the table was unbearable, like sitting across from a mask you used to love. The hallway outside the dining room was quiet, dim lighting, polished marble floors, a soft jazz tune playing overhead. I leaned against the wall for a moment, closing my eyes. My heart was racing, and I didn't even know why. That's when I heard someone say my name, not Mom or excuse me, but my actual name, Mrs. Harper. I turned. It was the waitress who had been serving us all evening. She looked barely 20, Her dark hair braided and tied back neatly, her name tag read Sarah, but now her expression was different, tense, serious. She glanced nervously around before stepping closer. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she whispered, "but I need to tell you something." I blinked. "What is it?" Her voice dropped even lower. "I saw your husband put something in your wine." Everything inside me went still. She rushed to explain. "When you got up to go to the restroom, I was clearing a table nearby, so I saw him pull something from his coat pocket and drop it into your glass. It dissolved fast. I don't know what it was, but the way he did it, it didn't feel right." I just stared at her. Surely she was mistaken. Ethan? He might be distant, even cold lately, but poison? "You're sure?" I asked. "I'm sure," she said, eyes wide. "I've seen him here before. He always acts so careful, calculated." I wouldn't have said anything if I wasn't absolutely certain. The hallway seemed to shrink around me, my breath caught in my chest. Sarah glanced toward the restroom door. "I have to get back before they notice I'm gone." "I'm sorry, if it were me, I'd want someone to tell me." And just like that, she slipped away. I stood there, frozen, one hand gripping the edge of the sink, the other still clutching my clutch bag like it was the only solid thing left in the world. I wanted to believe she was wrong, that Sarah had misunderstood, that Ethan had done something innocent, stirring sugar maybe, but deep down, I knew something was very, very, very wrong. And suddenly the man I had spent 10 years beside wasn't just a stranger anymore. He might be something far worse. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at the woman in the navy dress. Her face looked familiar, but something about her had changed. Her eyes weren't just tired, they were wide with something sharper, fear, yes, but also clarity. I had a choice to make. If Sarah was wrong, I'd look foolish, paranoid, but if she was right, I couldn't afford to ignore it. I took a deep breath, smoothed the creases from my dress, and stepped back into the hallway. The buzz of the dining room returned, like background noise I could no longer pretend was beautiful. Everything felt louder now, every laugh, every clink of glass, every flicker of candlelight. When I reached our table, Ethan barely looked up. Looked up from his phone. "Everything okay?" he asked, slipping his phone face down. "Yeah," I said lightly, just needed a moment. He smiled. "You sure? You look pale." "Headache." "Nothing serious." I sat down slowly, my eyes drifting to the 2 glasses of Cabernet still resting on the table. Mine was on the right where I had left it, his, untouched, was on the left, and somewhere inside one of them a lie waited. I made my move casually, hiding it behind a stretch and a quiet laugh. I reached for my glass, then paused. "This wine's too good to waste," I joked, and in a single smooth motion, I slid his glass toward me and nudged mine to his side. He didn't notice. His eyes were back on his phone, his fingers tapping some urgent message. I took a small sip. It tasted rich, slightly dry, just like always, but the wine sat heavy on my tongue, the bitterness blending with dread. "To 10 more years," I said, raising the glass, my eyes locked on his. He looked up, surprised for half a second, then smiled thinly and raised his own glass. "To 10 more," he echoed and drank deeply. I watched his throat move, watched the wine vanish. My own glass, his really still half full, a strange quiet settled between us. I kept smiling, even as every part of me screamed, had I just made a huge mistake? Had I tested something that didn't exist, or had I just placed Ethan on a collision course with his own intention? I didn't know yet, but what I did know, as I sat there holding the wrong glass in the right hand, was that I'd stopped being passive. I was no longer the woman waiting to be acted upon. I was the one watching now, the one listening, and if he had tried to hurt me, then I had just turned his plan on its head. At first, nothing happened. Ethan leaned back in his chair, casually wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. He looked relaxed, too relaxed, the kind of ease that came not from comfort, but from belief that he was in control, that everything was going according to plan. I twirled my fork, forcing myself to appear calm, but my fingers trembled just enough that I had to keep them hidden under the table. I watched him carefully, every blink, every breath, every nervous glance at his watch. "So," I said, my voice light, "how's that big deal going?" The one system that's been keeping you up every night. His eyes narrowed just slightly. It's complicated, he said, his tone clipped. Big stakes, high risk. You know how it is. I nodded slowly. Sure, but you've always liked the high-stakes games, haven't you? He didn't respond, just reached for his water and took a small sip. Then he glanced at my his wine glass, and paused. You're not drinking much, he said, tone casual. Saving it, I replied, smiling sweetly. This one deserves to be savored. His fingers drummed against the table again, faster this time, then slower, then they stopped altogether. A few seconds passed, then he coughed, just once, dry, quick, then again and again. My heart thudded in my chest as he brought his hand to his forehead. You okay? I asked, voice steady despite the storm inside me. Yeah. System. Yeah, he muttered, just tired. But he didn't look tired. His face had lost its color, a thin sheen of sweat gathered at his hairline. His eyes blinked speed up rapidly, unfocused. His hand trembled as he reached for his wine, my wine, but missed. The glass tipped, spilling across the table like dark blood on white linen. Ethan, I stood quickly, the chair legs screeching against the floor. He groaned, slumping forward, his body sagged as if the strings had been cut. Someone gasped behind me. A waiter dropped a tray, the dining room quieted, and suddenly all eyes were on us. Call 911, I shouted. Sarah appeared out of nowhere, her face pale as chalk. She stared at Ethan, then at me. The man slumped at the table, my husband of 10 years, wasn't just unwell. He was unraveling, and I knew without a doubt that the glass he had meant for me had betrayed him instead. His plan had just failed, and I had just survived it. The emergency room was cold, not in temperature but in spirit, a kind of stillness that made time feel suspended. I sat alone in a plastic chair, my navy silk dress wrinkled and stained with Cabernet, the same wine that almost ended my life. Everything felt distant. The buzz of fluorescent lights, the hum of a vending machine, a local news anchor murmuring from a wall-mounted TV no one was watching. I hadn't called anyone. Who would I call? My parents were retired in Florida. My coworkers thought I lived a picture-perfect life. I wasn't ready to explain that my husband might have tried to poison me. My hands were clenched in my lap, still trembling. I kept replaying the scene, the way he'd looked at my glass, the way his body began to fold in on itself, the way I'd stood there watching. A door opened. A doctor in a white coat stepped into the waiting area, scanning the room. Mrs. Harper, she asked. I stood, my knees slightly buckling. I'm Dr. Patel, she said, guiding me to a quieter corner. Your husband is stable, but he's under sedation. He ingested a high dose of a controlled sedative, diazepam, not the over-the-counter kind. This was heavily concentrated, possibly lethal if left untreated. My mouth went dry. I swallowed hard. I think that was meant for me, I said quietly. Her brows lifted slightly, but she didn't interrupt. A waitress warned me. She saw him put something in my drink, so I swapped our glasses. Dr. Patel nodded slowly, her voice calm. That would explain it. The dosage in his system was far beyond what's safe. He's lucky you acted when you did. I looked away, my throat tightening. I didn't even know for sure. I didn't want to believe it. She set her clipboard against her chest. We'll need to involve the police. This isn't just a medical emergency, it's a legal matter now. You did the right thing. The right thing? Was that what it was? I felt like I was drifting between two versions of reality, one where my husband was my partner, my protector, and one where he had quietly planned to eliminate me. All for what? Money? Control? I sat back down, this time not to wait but to gather myself. The man I thought I knew was behind a hospital curtain, sedated, alive, but the truth between us was exposed, and nothing could cover it back up. The truth came out faster than I expected. It started with a call from one of Ethan's former clients, a woman named Lacey, who used to gush about how Ethan saved her portfolio. She called me 2 days after the hospital incident, her voice trembling. I didn't know who else to tell, she said, but I think Ethan's firm is in serious trouble. That was an understatement. Within a week, everything unraveled, quietly, then publicly. Ethan's investment company, once praised in local business magazines, was collapsing. Months of bad trades, failed investments, and increasingly risky deals had caught up to him. Creditors were circling, lawsuits were already being drafted. I found documents hidden in a storage bin in our home office, papers he clearly hoped I'd never see. There were letters from banks, warnings from the SEC, even an unsigned power of attorney form that would have transferred all my company assets to his name if I had been incapacitated. That's what he wanted, not my death, necessarily, but my silence, my disappearance. He needed control, and he was desperate enough to do the unthinkable to get it. He must have thought if I couldn't speak, if I couldn't act, he could step in as my husband. He would have claimed authority, access, ownership. What broke me most wasn't the betrayal itself, it was the calculated patience, the way he smiled at me over dinner, the way he touched my hand, called me Mads, acted like nothing was wrong. He was drowning, and he was ready to drag me under just to keep himself afloat. But I didn't drown. I didn't sip that wine, and now the man who once promised to build a future with me was facing charges instead of champagne, all because I listened to a whisper and trusted my gut over a familiar smile. In the days that followed, I moved through life like a shadow. The media caught wind of the story before I was ready. Headlines hinted at scandal, investment star hospitalized after wine incident. My name was there, always paired with his, but no one knew the full story, at least not yet. Some friends reached out, confused, others disappeared completely 007. System, completely as if discomfort was contagious. I didn't blame them. Who wants to believe a man like Ethan, charming, respected, always the one raising a toast, could be capable of what he did? But I wasn't interested in saving face. I was interested in the truth. When the detectives called, I didn't hesitate. I told them everything, from Sarah's warning to the glass switch, from the hidden documents to the storage bin full of secrets. I handed it all over: emails, notes, even my own journals. Ethan was charged with attempted poisoning, among other crimes related to financial fraud. His lawyer tried to spin it, said it was all a misunderstanding, that he was under pressure, mentally unstable, but I'd lived beside that mind for 10 years. I knew the difference between instability and strategy. I didn't attend the first court hearing. I stayed home, sitting by the window in silence, drinking tea from a mug Ethan never liked. The sky outside was gray, but it felt honest. I didn't cry, not then. Instead, I opened my laptop, pulled up a blank document, and started writing, not about revenge, not about anger, but about survival, about how sometimes the most dangerous place for a woman isn't a dark alley, but the familiar space across the table from the man who says he loves her, and about how listening to your instincts, no matter how soft the whisper, isn't just brave, it's what saves you. I don't know exactly when it happened, when I stopped seeing myself as a victim and started recognizing my strength. Maybe it was the moment I swapped those glasses, maybe it was the second I chose to believe the frightened voice of a stranger over the calm smile of my husband, or maybe it was afterward, when I stood in front of a mirror and saw a woman I finally respected. The months that followed weren't easy, healing rarely is. I went to therapy, I distanced myself from people who still clung to the illusion of our marriage, I let myself grieve, not just the relationship, but the years I spent shrinking so someone else could shine. And then I began to speak. It started small, a women's leadership conference, then a podcast, then a panel at a nonprofit dedicated to helping women recognize coercion and financial manipulation in relationships. I didn't tell my story for attention. I told it because silence is what almost killed me. Today, I'm not defined by what happened that night at the Crescent. I'm defined by what I did after. I rebuilt. I returned to my company, stronger than before. I hired Sarah, the young waitress who warned me, as my executive assistant. She's studying business now, and I'm proud to mentor. People still ask if I ever loved Ethan, and the truth is, yes, I did, deeply. But love isn't a reason to sacrifice your safety, so it's not an excuse for betrayal, and no one, no matter how familiar, has the right to make you doubt your reality. If you're still watching this, and if my story resonates with you, even a little, then hear this. Trust yourself. Listen to your instincts. Don't wait for the crash to confirm what your gut already knows. And if you've ever escaped something that once felt unescapable, I hope you take a moment to honor your survival. This is Bella's story, but maybe it's yours too. If this touched you in any way, don't forget to like, comment, and share this video, and subscribe to The Art of Revenge, where true stories of strength, clarity, and quiet triumph are brought to light. Your voice matters, and your truth is never too small to be heard.